Good morning and welcome to Branch and Vine. My name is Heather and I have the joy of serving as pastor of our church. We've been hanging out on Sunday mornings for almost 2.5 years. We started back in April of 2018 and we continue to be a thriving congregation even as we're scattered right now, whether you're joining us online or in a neighborhood church, as we continue to creatively respond to the pandemic we are in right now. And so wherever you are welcome, and I'm glad you're here. If you do consider Branch and Vine your home base for faith community, we encourage you to live generously by giving financially to the mission and vision of the church, and you can do that online at branchvine.org. A few fun things that are happening this October that we encourage you to find these ways as opportunities to connect with other people in a safe way is on October 25th is our October pop-up church. It's where neighborhood churches and those who have been gathering online are invited to come together for a combined service. We'll be on October 25th, we'll be at Pavilion number 3. It's where the pavilion we were at in August at County Park, where we will share together in a time of celebration and message and even partaking in communion. So make sure that you mark that on your calendar even now to join us. Bring a mask with you, although we're outside. We encourage you to bring a mask for times when we can't socially distance and also for times in which we will be singing. So feel free to invite anyone to join you on that Sunday. Also, Lauren Meacham, our amazing ministry assistant who does a lot of behind the scenes stuff for our church, but especially for our kids and our older students as well. She is putting together a fall scavenger hunt for Wednesday, October 28th from 6 to 7 p.m. at The Mix at Arbor Place, which is 520 North Street in Southeast Lancaster City. And this scavenger hunt is a drop-in opportunity for kids of any age to come and do a socially distant scavenger hunt, hanging out with people in their household. If they want to dress up, that's an option. But you'll be going through a scavenger hunt outside at The Mix, and then at the end you will receive your very own pack of candy. And so it's a way for families to engage with some fall fun in this specific time of the pandemic. And also for our student huddle team, they are relaunching on October 21st, and they'll be gathering. And this student huddle is for elementary and middle school students to kind of huddle up together to learn about Jesus, specifically through the fruit of the Spirit this fall, and to kind of see what Jesus is all about and how to embrace his love for them in real ways. And so once again, Student Huddle is going to relaunch on October 21st from 6 to 7 p.m. at The Mix. We are currently looking for adult volunteers. And, you can start to say, elementary school, middle school, some people get really nervous about that. We were all there once. And so we're specifically looking for adults who could give maybe mostly as a substitute if someone is traveling or sick or whatever, to kind of jump on in, to really be a presence from about 5:45 to 7:15. So it's an hour and a half time commitment where you are there just to kind of get to know kids and to make sure that people are safe and people are in an environment where they can grow. So you're not being asked to teach a lesson. You're not being asked to lead a game or a song or anything. You're invited to build relationships with our young friends. So if you're interested in maybe serving in that way, once again, we have a core team of volunteers. We're looking to add a few other volunteers as subs for some weeks. You can contact Lauren via email at lauren@branchvine.org. I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to dive in to our message for this morning. And for our young ones who are gathered with us as well, there's a special message coming for you right after this video. But would you all join me in praying? Jesus, we pause at this point in our week. We pause to focus on you. We come to you with all of our laments and concerns and our hurts. We also come to you if we are experiencing great contentment or gratitude or joy. We pause now to intentionally center ourselves on you so that you then send us out from this time to continue the rhythm of embracing your love and sharing it with others. So guide us now, whether we're at home by ourselves or whether we're in a neighborhood church right now. It's in your name we pray. Amen. We are in the sermon series called Unexpected, and I appreciate Micah, who I love and I get to live with as my husband. But he helped us kind of kick off this sermon series of Unexpected, looking at the Beatitudes and the start of Matthew 5. And I'm going to dive into some more passages in chapter 5. But first I want to tell you that I grew up in a family where we had some of those fun sayings that my parents would repeat to my older sister, myself, and my younger brother. And it became kind of our own colloquial type sayings, or kind of our family customs or rules. And so some of the sayings that my mom or my dad would say to my sister and brother and I would be like, one was, Eisenbergers don't do that. My maiden name is Eisenberger, and so it would typically come out when it was like, you know what, you shouldn't be doing that, and Eisenbergers don't do that. Like, come on, straighten out. Another saying that would sometimes be echoed in our home if perhaps dessert or food in general was not being used in moderation. A saying could be like, a moment on the lips, a lifetime on the hips. Another saying that in particular my dad would say to us, I grew up 30 minutes south of the city, in the midst of cornfields and everything. And so not many people visited our porch, but my dad would sometimes say, especially at the dinner table, you never know who might be out on the porch. And it was typically something my dad would say if we were being unkind. We were like around the dinner table talking about someone that was not kind. And so, because actually what happened one evening was we were talking about someone and a neighbor showed up on our porch, and we were mortified that we were talking about people the way we were. And so that still sometimes, even at family, extended family meals now, even sometimes it'll come out, hey, wait, watch yourself. You never know who's out there on the porch. And then lastly, this was my mom's go-to saying for my sister and my brother, maybe more them than me growing up as an adolescent, but still, typically on a Friday night or a Saturday night, and when we were going out somewhere with friends, my mom would say, now, I may not always be with you, but Jesus always is, and so Jesus knows what you do. So these were sayings that I grew up with that now my family kind of pokes fun at, but there's some truth in it, and it was a way in which my family processed what it meant to live and to respond with a bit of humor. And so today's passage, I'm going to take us through the rest of chapter 5 in Matthew. And I cannot hit on all of the truth and the wisdom that is in Matthew 5. I encourage you. We've put out a Bible reading plan that for this month and then the next month in November, you will read little pieces of Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 each weekday. And so I encourage you, even if we don't cover every verse in the Sermon on the Mount, you can take that opportunity to read through those passages. But in Matthew chapter 5, we'll hear a lot of language of Jesus saying, "You have heard it said, ... And his own way of Jesus addressing the gathering of the Jewish people that were there listening to Jesus' sermon, that, you grew up hearing this, but I've come to bear the greatest truth to you. So they had heard so many things time and time again about what it meant to live, what it meant to be human as a follower of God. And Jesus is going to basically turn some of those things upside down. So I want to specifically read from Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 20. So you can follow along. So Jesus continues after the Beatitudes and says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." So what is Jesus getting at in these few verses? He talks about salt, light, and he talks about the law. And in verses 13 through 16, as he talks about, basically, you are the salt of the earth, talking to the Jewish people. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? And all of these words kind of have to draw us to the context that Jesus was in that day in Palestine. And so basically the process of salt back then would have been similar to the salt process that is still used in a country in Africa called Zambia. And basically what it takes place is you take grass from a specific salt area, salt pan, and you basically are burning that grass, and you're filtering then water through the ashes that this grass that has kind of soaked in salt is being burnt down. And then those ashes go through a filtration process of water being poured through those ashes. And basically what comes out in the process is this filtered compound. That as you put this compound out in the sun, and the sun is able to warm it, and things are evaporated, the moisture is evaporated out of it, what you are left with is salt. Salt that is used to preserve things, because there are no refrigerators back in the times of Jesus. So salt was used to preserve. But what would happen even in Zambia nowadays is if that salt compound is left out in the elements and it happens to rain, the compound completely disintegrates. The salt is poured out and it no longer has a use. See, in this passage, Jesus is basically saying to the Israelites, to the Jewish people that we read about in the Old Testament, the first half of the Bible, is he is calling these people to attention to say, actually, you've lost your saltiness. You've lost the things that create within you the way of following it and being obedient to God. And he goes further as he explains this about that he has not come to abolish the law, meaning the Torah. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. What we read very first in the Old Testament, he says, I've not come to completely abolish it. I've come to fulfill it. And even so more, he is basically saying that it doesn't matter if you obey what the Pharisees, the religious leaders, are saying. If you are just concerned about doing some things and not doing other things, and you forget that God is present with you and is calling you to be light in the world, calling you to be different than the people around you, you basically are salt that has lost its saltiness. You've lost the purpose. You've lost the identity. You've lost the whole essence of your existence. N.T. Wright says, as he processes this portion of scripture, N.T. Wright writes, how could God keep the world from going bad? The main function of salt in the ancient world, if Israel, his chosen salt, had lost its distinctive taste. Jesus is establishing this new way of being human that goes beyond what really was happening then. Was the Jewish people who were living in that area, they had kind of captured customs of the Roman world, and still they thought that the revolution of Jesus was going to be all about overthrowing the political system of the day. When actually Jesus was saying, it is less about upheaval in this earthly political system, and it is all about people following God in such a way that it calls attention to the fact that there might be something different going on in the world. It was less about going about the motions and more about the relationship, the transformative relationship with the one true God. That Jesus, God in flesh, was there to fulfill. Now, the rest of chapter 5, and I would love to dive into it, but basically then Jesus goes on and says, you've heard it said, and he addresses things in the law. You've heard it said that you shall not murder. But you know what? You lose your saltiness. You lose your light when you even hold a grudge against another Christian, or you are bitter towards someone, or you gossip or slander one of your brothers and sisters. He's basically saying, you've heard it said that the bare minimum is don't kill anyone. But to truly follow God, to believe that there is this new way of living that is better than what the earth can give us, which is true for us today, is to say you need to be people who reconcile within your relationships, not talk behind someone's back, not hold on to a grudge, not be bitter, but you better be people who reconcile. Because holding a grudge or being bitter is just as bad or has just the amount of consequences as it is to take someone's life. He goes on to address adultery, which really in the Jewish custom of the day that he was addressing was the whole, honestly, human sexuality of the Jewish people was looking a lot like the human sexuality of the Roman citizens of that day. There was, what he talks about in regards to Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 through 30, he's addressing what we interpret as the language of lust. Men or women not just being tempted to lust, but giving into the temptation to lust and to imagine what it would be like to sexually be with someone else, or that fantasy, that imagination of that. It goes even beyond the language we use today of lust, but he's actually saying To have a God-centered human sexuality means that we have to think bigger than what he was addressing back then, but even for us today, that our human sexuality does not look just like everyone in the world, but it looks different. It's this holiness of the covenant of marriage, and that being the place where we express ourselves sexually with one another. And so it's not just God saying, hey, you've heard it said, don't commit adultery, don't covet your neighbor's wife or husband. But it's broadening to say, actually, it's even to say that sex is within marriage, which is including lusting after others is a sin, which we naturally have to include viewing of pornography in that. Jesus is saying, you've heard it said, this is the baseline for sexual ethics, for practicing your human sexuality. Jesus is saying, oh, no, you're called to something even more holy and God-centered than what the culture has given you. He goes on to talk about divorce. He goes on to talk about oaths, basically saying, you've heard it said, don't break your oath. But Jesus is basically saying, your yes should be yes and your no should be no. You should be people who are completely 100% honest all the time, whether there's a legal reality of taking an oath or not. And then we read beyond about an eye for an eye, which I would love to preach on even more at some point. And the love for your enemies is not just the law that you love other Israelites, but you love all of the people around you. I'm just scratching the surface, but Jesus is setting up that we as people then and even now, we represent this resurrected power of God at work in the world. That is what we long for. That is what we are invited into. And that includes a new way of living our lives that will not look the same as those who choose not to follow Jesus. Our lives, the way we speak, the way we act, should sometimes be so uncomfortable to live out the rhythm of Jesus, because you know what? We live in this earthly kingdom where those rhythms are not practiced or not considered to be right or good or popular. Jesus never said following him would be comfortable or make sense or be without its challenges. Jesus in this passage is calling us, just like he was specifically calling the Israelites, the Jewish people, back into that covenant with God that was less about what to do and what not to do. But to say it was this life that they were invited into and we are invited into that creates within us a transformation of the way we live, that then calls as a living, walking testimony for other people to see there is a new way of living, and it is rooted in the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. It is not a way of living that makes sense to the world. And what I want to say, and what I want to ask us today, is when we as Christians wholeheartedly make Jesus King of our lives, Lord of our lives will be different. Not in and this is what happens, in which not I'm the better person and you are such a sinner and you are an awful person. That's not what it is. But when we make Jesus King and Lord of our lives, and we begin to realize there's this new way of living that is actually not the rules of the world, as we are transformed, we then call others to come along with us and to be discipled in the ways of Jesus that transforms them at their deepest longing. Their deepest longing, your deepest longing, my deepest longing is where Jesus meets us. And so for us today, have we lost our saltiness? For some of us, we have to consider, have we ever lived our life so rooted in Jesus that our life looks different? From the neighbors we love, but who also don't choose to follow Jesus yet. Is there any distinction between the way I live my life and the way my neighbor who doesn't follow Jesus lives their life? If there isn't any distinction, then we have to come to Jesus and say, oh, Jesus, help me and transform me. Today, it's not about you're a horrible person, but it's about, my goodness, friends, we are invited into this new way of living that is hard. When we think about reconciling our relationships, when we think that the baseline for God-honoring sexuality isn't just, hey, don't lust or don't commit adultery, but it's not lusting. It's to say there's this holiness of sexual expression within the covenant of marriage. It's like the world doesn't believe that either. But we have to go back. Even if we think about oaths and how we love one another and retribution and love, all of that. Are we really willing to root ourselves in the following of Jesus, or will we continue to root ourselves in what is less than best and the ways of the world? I think Jesus is calling us to be the salt and light of the world even now. In Lancaster City, in your community, at your work, as your kids go to school, wherever it is. I hope we are people who, in seeking Jesus, are brave and courageous people to root ourselves in Jesus. That is uncomfortable. Doesn't make sense. But is obedient to Jesus' call to be the salt and light of the world. This week, I want to encourage you, as I will be doing as well, is to continue reading through our Bible reading plan. It's posted on social media. It was in our monthly Connect email. We'll post it again this week, but taking a few verses each day, each weekday in particular, to soak in. I encourage us to do that. I encourage us to pray. I appreciate that Alan, one of our prayer leaders, has put together a weekly and daily way to focus our prayer time. We have that on social media. It went out in our Connect email. If you want to have that to follow along with, please reach out to us. But prayer is what roots us in Jesus. And then the practice for this week, as uncomfortable as it is, I want you to, and I'm going to do this too, intentionally carve out 10 minutes this week. And invite Jesus to reveal the things within your life that needs transformed, because they're areas that do not represent the resurrected power of Jesus. There are areas in your life or my life that are not the salt and light of Jesus' love. If we only use Sunday mornings as to check off a box on our weekly to-do list and don't pursue Jesus throughout the rest of the week, then we are missing out on the transformative power of Jesus. I pray that you go in peace to love and serve the Lord, knowing that you are invited to be the salt and the light of Jesus. Have a great week.